Well, wasn't it? This, I was just going to, this was the issues in, yeah. Yeah, okay. So, go ahead, you had a question.
My question is, firstly, what do you mean by too many silos and too much early specialization, A? And then you had a slide on vocational training. So I wanted to also have a look at that as to what are the new policies for the new draft what is it recommending?
About this policy is that this policy is actually seeking to empower faculty and administration of institutions. And it's hoping that these people will do the right thing and will take leadership role and improve quality of education. So if this constituency doesn't rise to the occasion, then we are in trouble as far as this policy is concerned. And for example, in order to help faculty do that, it's, for example, this is a fairly controversial discussion. It recommends that faculty evaluation is based not just on teaching and research, but also on service to the institution and to the community. Now, what this does is that this brings in subjective evaluation. And this, in a system, our present system is very deficit in trust. So it actually makes everyone very nervous. So there is a lot of concern about this. Okay, so but that's just an example. Now I want to talk about vocational education. You asked about this. So, you know, vocational education was talked about starting from our very first policy in 1968 and also in 1986, saying that it should be implemented. But it failed, and it failed spectacularly. And that's the main reason for that is the fact that there was a kind of class system getting created, which said, there are two main reasons really. One is the class system, which said that, oh, you are not good enough for university, so you better go and do vocational education. That was one. But the other one was also that the pathways for students of vocational education to get into higher education or to go out and work and return to higher education were not mapped out at that time. So vocational education focus was on dropouts from schools, and then none of these pathways for returning students were made out. So if somebody wanted to come back and do a bachelor's degree, they would not get admission. And they would not, these people would not also, were not even listed as eligible for government jobs. So all of that contributed to vocational education becoming a disaster. So what this policy has tried to say is that we should mainstream vocational education and have regular schools, colleges, and universities offering mainstream education. Now, this is a statement that actually draws a lot of flack from faculty, saying that vocational education is not in our DNA. This is not what we do. We are about university education, and it's different from what we do. But there I just want to say that recently, two excellent examples of vocational education have emerged out of TIS. Okay? And the amazing thing is that TIS is a premier research and postgraduate institute, but the very fact that it's a premier institute meant that a degree in vocational education from TIS was attractive to students. And it was also attractive for partners to work with TIS to provide vocational education. So the interesting thing about both of these models is that not a single student actually steps on the campus of TIS. These, you know, this program, the NUSSD, is National University Students Skill Development Program. So it's actually a supplement to regular BA, BSc, BCom students by giving them a certificate degree in life skills and soft skills and management and leadership and entrepreneurship and things like that, okay? So these people go to colleges, sign up with colleges and teach them there. And just the fact that these students have gotten better communication skills, better soft skills, have helped employ them. That's one. But the more interesting one, which I've been writing about, is the School of Vocational Education at TIS, which as of 3 days ago now has an enrollment of 28,000 students in a space of 5 years. They started in 2014. And they are doing they're doing many things, but one of the courses that they're doing is a bachelor's degree in vocational education. And they're doing it in partnership with two kinds of partners. One is industry as partners, where students apprentice. They work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day at these places, gather, learn on the job, and either on evenings or on Saturdays or both, they come to another partner, which is a classroom partner, which can be a regular educational institution like a college, and come and take courses, which are there are two kinds of courses. One is the theory component of the practical functional learning that they are doing, of the skills that they are learning. And the other is the general courses, which includes financial literacy, digital literacy, communication skills, entrepreneurship, all of that kind of stuff. The general courses are designed by TIS, and the theory courses are designed by experts in those companies. And this, I think, is an amazing model. We were recently abroad and we presented it to an international audience, and most people were amazed that something like this could actually work. And what it is it's financially self-sustaining, it's scalable, and it's low cost. And we hope that going ahead, this will grow, actually. So it's possible. It's possible to mainstream. So what is good about this is the example. Will other colleges and universities do it? We don't know. We'll find out.
No, just quickly. How is it financially self-sustaining? The students are paying the tuition, or?
Yes. So two things. What they try to do is to say that for the apprentices, the places where they work, they should pay them a stipend. So we did a survey recently, and about 60% of the students are getting stipends. So the fees are lower than the stipend. So most students manage to pay the fees from just their own stipend. So, and then, what TIS does is revenue share with its partners. So TIS collects all the fees. The students are from TIS. They get certificates from TIS, and TIS revenue shares as much as 80% of the revenue. Despite that, TIS is in the positive. TIS is making money. The fees are restricted to between 2,000 and 4,000 per month, which is very reasonable for India. And because of the numbers, TIS is actually making money.
What courses are there?
So they are working in 19 verticals. So I have written a preliminary report about them. I'm happy to share that report with you. We are presently working on a more detailed report, which includes many more details, because we are hoping that people we'll put it in open access, and we hope that people will download it and use it to replicate this model. But what this demonstrates is the fact that, an organization like TIS has academics who know how to pay attention to training a student for the long term. That you don't do a 3-month course on something and you go and start a job and you can't do anything other than what you learned during those 3 months. If you train with TIS for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, you are prepared to not just do this job, but a few other jobs in the same area. And that strength academic institutes bring. And so we are hoping that education policy is recommending that not just colleges and universities, but even schools do this in secondary schools. And the most important thing is that this model is what they call demand-driven, which means that only if you can find placement for students in industry. I'll give you an example, Dr. Reddy's lab for pharma students. Dr. Reddy's hires 50, 100, sometimes 400 students for placement. So if you do that, then you can come and work there, only then they create batches. So they first look for industry who's willing to place students, and then they create batches, and then they teach them the theory aspects of the pharma industry and general courses. So it's demand-driven. So similarly, in India, dialysis, kidney issues is a big problem. Dialysis is a big problem. There are not enough technicians skilled in dialysis. So dialysis technology, you find places, which have these machines who want students to learn. So they train there, and then, you give them not just dialysis, but some general healthcare courses and some general courses and so on. So, this is the model that we think can grow because it sort of overcomes this class system that vocational education has fallen into. Plus the fact that in recent years, the government of India has actually defined the National Skills Qualification Framework, which allows people to sort of go out and come back some years later. So if you stopped at a certain stage, you can come back some years later and carry on where you left off. So these two problems have been overcome. So we think that that will work out. The policy has recommended that another committee should be sort of created to work out many more of the details. But I think it's wonderful that these two models actually exist. So it makes academia do things that it has not done before, But the good news is that only a few people in each academic institution need to do this. The others can continue doing what they always did. So they collaborate with ITIs, polytechnics, local industries, businesses, farms, hospitals, NGOs to find jobs for students where they can learn while they're working. So that's vocational education. The other point I wanted to talk about, sorry, Padma. Is there a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Leena, there's a small question. You said that the new education policy takes into account, the center stage is the needs of the student and the staff. What exactly did you mean by student needs?
So, like I said, employability is a big thing now. And quality education is another thing, and parents are measuring quality education by employability. So, while you may lament about whether that is a good thing or not, but in most places, success is being measured by what percentage of your students are finding employment. But in the policy, we've done much more than that. We're looking at better curriculum, we're looking at experiential learning, we're talking about society connect, projects, then more liberal education, more choices in your subjects. And also in India, professional education is completely separate from general education. So we are suggesting that they sort of try to move organically towards each other so that,
Studies and keep their numbers, record or report their numbers.
I'm sorry, what studies did you say that was?
Tracer studies, like...
What is that?
Tracer, like where your students go?
No. As a policy, that's not a policy matter. So we won't say that, but we would say that we would encourage institutions to follow their alumni for sure. Yes.
All right. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. We would encourage their students to keep track of their alumni and follow them. Yes.
In addition to the question I posed just before we broke for the tea break, I was going to ask, does external quality assurance occur for universities in your context? And if so, who undertakes?
So there is no external, we have the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, that's called NAC. And so far, NAC has been doing all the accreditation itself, which then means that a very small percentage of colleges and universities have been accredited so far because NAC has limited capacity, It doesn't work through agencies. So what this education policy has said is that NAC should empower many more agencies to become accrediting agents. And we are saying that academic institutions can have a cell that does accrediting of other institutions because it will bring them money. So while we are saying that government should increase its funding to academic institutions, we are also saying that simultaneously academic institutions must find ways to raise additional money to do more things. And being an accrediting agency is one of them. Who better than to accredit than other academic institutions? You only have to solve the conflict of interest issues, that's all. I just wanted to mention the National Research Foundation and the National Education Commission because those are the two new things. And then if there are any other questions. So the National Research Foundation, like the National Research Council in Sri Lanka, what we are saying is that it should be attached to the Ministry of Human Resource Development and it should focus on universities and colleges. It's not as if India does not have funding agencies. You saw some graph before which had many other DST and DBT and ICMR and all of those. Those can continue. The policy explicitly says that those can continue, but we need an organization that is focused on capacity building for research because we have neglected research for so long that many universities and colleges are not in a position to do research. If a faculty member has never done research in their life, has never made a single publication, it's unlikely that they will be able to just do it overnight, right? So there are two things needed. One, you need funding, and second, you need mentorship. So the National Research Foundation suggests that a large chunk of money be made available for universities and colleges, and that it should fund research across all disciplines. And, for now, to start with, it will have sciences, technology, social sciences, arts and humanities. But if tomorrow you want to create a division for agriculture or a division for medicine, it can be done. That is the idea, depending on who's applying for funding. And then the policy has suggested that there should be a structure in which, research proposals are funded through peer review, which is, so for example, we have under DST, we have something called the SCRB, Science and Engineering Research Board, which has been doing this for some time. And many scientists felt that, why should you have yet another body doing something like this? But here the focus is universities and colleges, and secondly, that they will receive mentorship from researchers who have good track in research, good track record in research, which basically means that if I'm a researcher and I know people in some university, I can collaborate with them and jointly submit a research proposal. And it doesn't matter if I'm retired, I will get top-up salary to continue to work with the university. So this is very attractive for existing researchers who have a good research track record to work with universities and colleges to submit proposals as co-PIs, and their presence will help guide the research. That is the thinking. So this is what we've done, and the reason I'm talking about this is because this is something that government has already committed to. They have said that they will set up a National Research Foundation. But the only worrying thing is that they've also said that, all the money from every other institution will be put here, which is actually very bad news. But we don't know yet. That was a budget speech of the finance minister, so hopefully that's not true. Because every country has multiple funding agencies. It's a good idea to have multiple funding agencies. So we've said that there should be separate funding agencies. So that's the and every proposal will be accompanied by funds for PhDs for PhDs and postdocs. This is all I wanted to say. This was the NRF. And the last thing I wanted to say was what I talked about, the National Education Commission, which is a way of bringing in expert educationists into the management of education in the country. You see, we have MHRD running education, but MHRD co-ops one or two professors. For example, Professor Venkatesh Kumar has been in MHRD for, I don't know, half a dozen years or longer, but it's not enough to have one person, right? You need to have expertise across the board. So you need to have a group of people sort of working with MHRD to make policy. And like I said earlier, also to look at policy implementation and to say that if there are unintended consequences of policy implementation, then tweak that. There are many examples of that, like in the RTE, the 25% quota meant the government schools got emptied. That was not an intended consequence, right? So how do you deal? So if you had a body that was looking at the data and was sort of reacting quickly in conjunction with the politicians and the bureaucrats and the educationists working together, you can prevent policy implementation going wrong. So that was the logic behind suggesting the National Education Commission. And it's so we got a lot of flack saying that the policy is trying to centralize decision making, but that's not really true. The Constitution gives the regulation and quality to the central government. So the role of the National Education Commission is really restricted to that. And of course, one is bringing in the state governments and the other ministries involved in education. There are 19 ministries in India involved in education. Everything, Ministry of Labor and Textiles and Agriculture and Health, all of them are in education. So they are bringing them all together to coordinate so that we don't have this kind of piecemeal education. Yeah, so CABE as so it's a body, so the CABE membership is actually the education ministers of the states and a few experts. So we felt that it's not enough because we want many more educationists in the body. So, and we don't want all education ministers of all states. I actually spent a week reading all CABE minutes, you know, and before these new IITs and all came, every CABE meeting is about which state. If a state does not have an IIT, it wants an IIT. And if a state has an IIT, it wants an IIM. And if the state has both an IIT and an IIM, it wants an ISER. This is all the CABE discussions are all about, you know. So we felt that somehow, you know, it was not sort of going right. And what Dr. Kasturirangan also thought at that time was that he was thinking about the Space Commission and the Atomic Energy Commission. So he felt that if the body is actually, given that there are 19 ministries and, you know, Ministry of Labour is not going to listen to MHRD. So he felt at that time that somehow the PMO or the Prime Minister should be involved, or at least this National Education Commission should either be headed by the PMO or report to the PMO. So that was his thinking, that in order to force coordination across all the ministries. But we've come in for a lot of flack for that, so there will be, depending on the inputs that come in, there will be some rethinking on that. But the reason for suggesting that was basically coordination between ministries. So, you know, you have the ministry, now they have new ministry on skill development, and you don't know, I mean, and so if you say that you want to mainstream skill development into higher education, there is no, these two people will not talk to each other. So that mainstreaming will not happen. So that was the reason for thinking of a National Education Commission with this kind of function. So these are some of, I would say these are the key reforms in the education policy. Go ahead, someone had a question. Yeah. Education Commission, yeah.
Commission, it is going to be formed, or it is already existing?
If it is accepted by the government. So the state is that the government appointed a committee to create a new draft education policy. I got a chance to work with them. Now, so that the committee's policy is out. And now for the last 2 months, it has been in the public domain for feedback. It's now the feedback, end of feedback date is August 15th. So we have already received 1 lakh responses. So, you know, we have to sit and read each and every one.
In Bangladesh also, government is thinking of having Higher Education Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And with the emergence of Higher Education Commission, then UGC will be abolished. That university
in Bangladesh?
Yes.
Okay.
So government is planning to have Higher Education Commission.
Mm-hmm.
When Higher Education Commission will be formed, then UGC will not exist. So this is the thing, but due to some bureaucratic reasons, it has been just lingering and lingering. Yeah.
So I think India has been trying to abolish the UGC for at least years in India, okay? But in this education policy, so the National Education Commission is not related to regulation. The regulation-related thing, let me just see. I have the regulation-related thing. What we are saying is that what I told Amita on the slide, that policy making, standard setting, that what should teachers know, standard setting, funding, regulation, accreditation. These 5 roles, which typically governments have, must be done by separate institutions. So we've said that. So in this policy, we're not saying abolish UGC, we are saying let UGC do what it was created to do, which is grants, which is funding higher education. Let's have a new higher education regulatory authority, which will have minimal regulation for all kinds of institutions. It's not subject dependent. It will have minimal regulation, and it will give permissions for new institutions to start, and it will enforce its regulations. Then accreditation will become mandatory. Everyone has to be accredited every 5 years. And for that, capacity has to be built, which means NAC will then give licenses to become accreditation agencies. All existing regulatory institutions like the Medical Council of India, the Bar Council of India, the NCTE, they will all become standard setting bodies. These are bodies that will contain professionals who will define what is expected to be known by young graduates who pass out. And higher education institutions will read those recommendations and adapt their curriculum accordingly. So that is the long-term vision for how education should evolve in India.
What about accreditation?
I don't know if any of this is
Accreditation Council, do you have any Apex Accreditation Council for higher education?
NAC will become the super accreditor. And it will not accredit itself except when there are disputes to be resolved. The accreditation agencies that it empowers will do the accreditation. And
In Bangladesh, just recently, Bangladesh Accreditation Council has been formed. Just recently.
Yeah.
It has not yet started work in full swing.
so NAC has been around for what, 2 decades? Something like that. 2 decades. But even then, I think less than 25% of universities and colleges have been accredited because it was not mandatory. And, but now we need that because we are saying something else also very, very important, that the affiliation system will be closed down within a decade. Because the affiliation system is crippling. What it does is that it actually enables people who know nothing about education to run colleges. All you have to do is get some land at concessional rates from government, and then build some nice structures and hire some teachers. The rest, the syllabus, the examinations, everything will be provided by the university. So you don't have to be an educator or an educationist to actually be involved in education. So that is the reason why we have proliferated so many colleges. So that has to be phased out. Only promoters, for new institutions, only promoters who understand education and are able to run an autonomous education institution will get permission to run educational institutions. And through accreditation and other means, the poorly functioning colleges are being sought to being shut down. So in many ways, it's a very hopeful policy. But, we think that, okay, after independence, there was a lot of hope in the country. Now we are heading towards 75 years and maybe an 100th anniversary in 20 years. Why not be hopeful? But the bureaucrats say the feedback we've got is that it's not very practical for implementation. But we feel that if the spirit is communicated and some subset of institutions do the right thing, they will generate lateral pressure on the others. That's the thing. Tell me.
So, the first one was with regards to the Rashtriya Ayog.
Yeah. That's this one.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons why CABE system was created was because education is a concurrent subject and
Correct.
one needs to also take into account state interests.
Correct.
So while it is fine that there are going to be a lot more expert educationists in this body, how is this body going to take into account and accommodate state interests? Because there are a huge number of diversities, there are very specific interests that need to be balanced at the national level. So how will that happen? That is first.
Shall I answer it before you ask me the next question? So, like I said, what we are doing is that state governments and other ministries involved in education will be part of CABE, part of National Education Commission as 2 standing committees for all decision making. Okay, and the amazing thing is that when consultations were being done for the education policy, so many people said the central government should take over higher education. Let states continue to do school education, but central government should take over higher education. But the committee actually consciously said that you cannot do that. It's important to retain the diversity, and it's important for state governments to continue doing what they are doing. What the policy can do is to make sure that the regulatory system is better and that there is some accountability for state governments also. So that's what we've tried to do. So there is absolutely no intention to step on the toes of state governments at all. But like I said, we are trying to take away, micromanaging ability with state governments where universities are concerned, because they will appoint a vice chancellor, because they get to choose the vice chancellors, and through the vice chancellors, they essentially just do whatever it is that they want to do. And the most interesting thing they want to do is spend money to build infrastructure. Yeah? But what we want to do, so the only way we are doing that is by saying that each educational institution must be run by a board of governors, and the vice chancellor reports to that board. Now, we hope that if the board is well constituted, then there is at least some checks and balances on how the vice chancellor functions. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Archana.
I'll skip one question. I'll just move straight to the third one, which is to do with the process. You said there are hundreds of thousands of comments that have been received.
Correct.
So how is the clearinghouse or the nodal agency or whoever is processing all these submissions back, how is it going to actually process this and use it for revising the draft which is available?
So there was, at the time of the writing of the policy, there was a drafting committee which consisted of 4 members. One of them was Anurag Behar, who is the Vice Chancellor of Azim Premji University. So the MHRD actually retained the drafting committee, 4 people, but it added Dr. Sridhar, who was a member of the original committee, and it added one more person, Chetan, who used to be also, along with me, part of the research team for the committee, actually. So we are 6 people. But we realized very quickly that 6 people cannot look through 100,000. So Anurag has actually brought in a dozen people from, from Azim Premji Foundation and Azim Premji University who understand education. And, every input has been printed. It's being highlighted with either red or green, or there's a color coding, four categories, to be accepted as a big change in the document, to be accepted as a refinement in the document, to be rejected because it's completely outside the principles, and one more I forget. Okay, now 4. I haven't done any work on it because I was away. But in 4 categories, it's being marked each, so that tomorrow when there's an RTI and somebody asks what happened to my recommendation, you can look it up and say that this one was flagged for rejection on this basis, or this one was flagged as a refinement in the document. Then the minister has also said that in the document itself, we should flag where we have made changes and why, on the basis of which comments. So what is happening is that we are clustering comments, say, based on specific things. A lot of the comments can be clustered because many are coming on the issue of closing down teacher education institutions. Many are coming on the issue of appointments to teachers. So we've said that teacher appointment should be district-wise or school complex-wise. Okay, this is very unacceptable to teachers because they prefer to have this transferable thing and then hope to return to their home place and so on. So there are teacher unions that are so there are groups of suggestions that are coming. So we're classifying them, and then we will either make refinements or changes. So the RSA appointments committee will probably get changed completely. Whether it will be headed by the Prime Minister or it will report to the Prime Minister will get changed also, because the Space Commission only reports to the Prime Minister. That's because the Prime Minister is the Minister of Space and Atomic Energy. Okay, the Minister in charge of Space and Atomic Energy. But in education, there is a Minister for Education. So what should the relationship of the Prime Minister be? We wanted more funding and we wanted better coordination between ministries. So that's how we wrote that, but we'll read all the suggestions and that will be a big change that will come. But this is the process. So each and every, tons of Excel sheets and hard copy markings, so that each and every input is accounted for. Yeah. So I don't know how long we have, but we are just working for it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope my question doesn't sound impolite or disruptive, but that's the intention, to be positively disruptive.
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether we're thinking in this sector of the higher education theme, whether we're thinking too small with respect to only, I know that you're only focusing at the moment on the Indian data that you have, whether we should be thinking like other regional groupings internationally, to be thinking about how we understand higher education regionally. So, for example, we might be talking about the comparative, collaborative agendas that need to be constructed if we're going to act as a constituted network or block. For example, as is done in the debates around the African Union now, pulling together centers of excellence across the regions, working on collaboration, capacity development, etc. And it runs the risk, nevertheless, of a new form of colonialism, where the big organizers or the big players begin to exert a kind of influence. So I think in the agenda, as we construct this particular section, is to be able to alert ourselves to the way in which higher education is also needing to be thought through, not necessarily in a nationalistic way, but rather to be thinking about it in a much more collaborative, regional connectivity way. And it links back to the presentation earlier on what do we mean by networks of actors. Each of us have different agendas in that. So I'm just being impolite, deliberately to be disruptive, to say, how do we take what you're suggesting to us of the kinds of policy discourses that's happening within one big context, and how do we move it into a bigger context of a collaborative network?
Thank you for that question. I was in the audience of, okay, let me step back a bit. The engineers are already doing it at an international level. So I was in the audience in IIT Bombay. I worked there for a while. And when these people came, I will give you the name of that organization tomorrow because I forget now. This is in long time ago, about 6-7 years ago. They came to talk about how the engineering education worldwide needs transformation. And therefore, many famous universities around the world, not just the United States, MIT was of course one of the leaders, but in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, many other countries, they have come together to imagine a new international curriculum and an international way of delivering engineering education. And they came to IIT Bombay to pitch to IIT Bombay to join the club, to revise. But of course, IIT Bombay cannot by itself make a decision. So I don't think they joined. Maybe they have now. But I will look them up on the web and share that thing with you tomorrow. But my point is, to bring this example is the following, that any such move towards sort of collaborative thinking on the future of higher education will have to be bottom up. It will have to be because a group of interested countries come together and say, we have a shared vision for higher education and do it. And this discussion has happened and continues to happen in the context of climate change and sustainability, and of course in the context of SDGs. But in India, academia cannot promise anything to any international body because it is so controlled. So until autonomy comes, and just like MIT said, we are going to lead a transformation in engineering education, maybe TIS can stand up and say that, there isn't enough social science research, and here's the new vision for social science education and research. But that these institutions must be in a position to do that. And maybe TIS is because TIS is autonomous, but the too few are, you need educational institutions to be able to lead these transformations on their own. So I think if we are talking about South Asia, if it doesn't have to be at the level of countries, it can be at the level of individual universities, 5, 10, 15 of us coming together. And the engineers are doing a very good job. I will give you the website tomorrow. I just need to jog my memory. Yeah.
Standard to which we're always trying to catch up. We never feel we set the agenda, but we try to achieve excellence or whatever it is on somebody else's framework. So I think the question is also, what is it that we see higher education to mean and do in our regional context?
Correct. Correct.
What does it have to achieve for us?
Correct.
Apart from the global ranking game,
yeah,
which we were always late entrants and always trying to catch up.
Correct. So she was asking me that question about what does it mean when it comes to international standards for higher education. And that's a very good question to think about. I was referring to international context only in the standards, only in the context of, MOUs between countries to mutually recognize courses. which means that if MOUs are signed, then a student who has finished a degree, a diploma or a degree from here can continue their education in the UK, for example, if India and UK sign MOU. That time they have specific processes where they study, the courses, and the simplest one is about the length of the degree. So it's a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, and whether that is acceptable in that country or not. But, other than sciences, I think a lot of indigenization of education, some has happened, much more needs to happen, right, to be useful for us. But we believe that until, a critical mass of institutions are actually thinking of what is the sensible curriculum to teach, for the next decade or 2 decades, that conversation will not happen. At the moment, it's not happening because, there are, we have 993 universities, but only 285 are affiliating. 285 between them affiliate 40,000 colleges. So 700, 500, 900 is 900s are extremes, but 700, 500, 400 affiliated colleges is standard. So why should you have 400 colleges teaching the exact same thing? Because you want to make it easier to examining in the exact same way through written answer sheets. That's the disaster that we have to overcome in our own countries first before we do this. But you're right about that. Your point is completely correct. Yeah.
The education of South Asian countries, and we say present status and future evolution. I think what Padma and saying are very true. We need to have some future targets, and this is a good point to start. And the question about having the same curriculum for a particular subject is not the only thing in having this kind of an agenda regionally. True, as you say, if 400 schools or colleges or universities in engineering have the same curriculum, that would be pretty boring. But that, I think, is just one aspect. I mean, there are so many other things like what are the standards to be followed by private higher education providers? Can there be a regional setup for that? And how do higher education teachers be accountable to the nation? Could be a regional setup for that. So I think in this future evolution aspect of this workshop, that's a good point to consider.
Padma, maybe if you want to talk about it on day 3 sometime, and see if there's space, we could take ideas for future collaboration on these kind of topics. Thank you, Dipti. Yeah.
I was just wondering, I mean, if there has been any work on, how the South Asian University has progressed or not progressed according to its goals. I mean, like that was an institution which was created out of political commitments from the 8 governments. So, any studies on how that has actually contributed to fostering, regional exchanges in higher education, regional strengthening?
Yeah, would you like to comment?
And the other, I mean, relates to when I look at the comments made from different country reps, I mean, it's like, so we are all going through similar these similar stages of reforms either in school education or in higher education. For example, like the issue of higher education commission. Yeah, it started in Pakistan and then now Bangladesh, and it's coming to Nepal. And the
India too, there's a bill that is alive in Parliament at the moment.
And the whole notion
Higher Education Commission of India.
University Grants Commission to a Higher Education Commission is to strengthen the role of the education minister, and strengthen the role of the bureaucracy in managing higher education at the cost of an autonomous University Grants Commission. So I mean, and then again, I mean, if you look at the school education, I was talking to Bangladesh colleagues. This introduction of standardized assessments on a sample basis. So started from India again, Nepal is also there, Bangladesh is there. So, like these similar, I mean, at similar times we are all, getting injections of, similar education reforms, but we are not talking about them at each other's level. So, it somehow seems to be the case that even if we are all undergoing, similar these patterns of education reforms, we are not really talking to each other regarding how, regarding their genesis, the trajectories, and what impacts they are having on the larger system as a whole. And again, I mean, we say, like Nepal, we say it's a third-hand version of the Macaulay education introduced in India. So, I mean, that's one way in which we portray our education system, yeah. And still, I mean, there is very little that's going on between Nepal and India in terms of what we can learn from the failures of Indian education system, let's say, or the successes of the same.
So what I understand from this, I mean, I'm a relatively new person in this research in education space, yeah. What I see is that there's not enough research in the education space. So if there was, and there were enough conferences, and there were regional conferences in which we meet and discuss how education systems in our country works, then there would be more conversation around it. What I find is that there's no conversation around education systems because there's not enough research about education systems at the regional level. Also, yeah, international conferences on education, yeah, we write something, we write data from our countries is attractive to make models, but we are not discussing at the regional level. That's true, yeah.
So, ma'am, it is related to funding, research, and academic autonomy. These three, based on that question, that how much political, influence matters in the quality of research, fund distribution, when we talk about DST and then ICMR. So, how much political influence, which is based on, you say, national interest. So what do you mean by this national interest? We talk about fund distribution in different bodies like DST or ICMR.
So at the moment, ICMR is funded through Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And DST is the Ministry of Science and Technology. And so they're all different ministries and they are allocating some percentage of their budget. CSIR and DST are the same ministry, Ministry of Science and Technology. So they're all allocating based on their own interests. Here with the National Research Foundation, what we want to say is that, peer-reviewed research proposals should be funded, but from time to time, there should be call for proposals for areas of research that are worth doing. Like, for example, in healthcare, drug-resistant TB or something like that, if you want to do and you want to tap on experience of people on the ground and what they know, and universities nearby who have access to the people and can... So you can do, sort of thematic call for proposals can happen. But in general, it should be driven by the researchers themselves, right? And luckily we have a working model. The SCRB, the Science and Engineering Research Board, was actually conceived as the equivalent of the National Science Foundation. And eminent professors like Professor Sienna Rao, Professor Rodam Narasimha, and many others, very senior people, were involved in conceptualizing National Science Foundation. But in the end, they went and put it inside DST, which is a small department of the Ministry of Science and Technology, which is not a very important ministry. So, you have the Ministry of Science and Technology, DST, and then SCRB inside it. Now, to say that SCRB will look after, funding of colleges and universities is folly, actually. But many scientists are saying that SCRB is functioning well. Why do you need to create a new body? We need a body that is at a much higher level, can make autonomous decisions about funding research. And that's why we propose this. So.
Thank you, Padma. I'm aware that this particular section is called Higher Education Systems and Policies. I'm wondering whether we're again keeping it too narrow for a focus on the region, because I'm wondering where the systems and policies are the lever for the change for the South Asian context. Whether we are paying enough attention to our epistemology, our ontology, our conceptions of ourselves and who we define and how we define. Because what's happening in the way in which we're framing the agenda at the moment is putting faith in policy and systems And maybe that has failed us in the past. And so the question is, why are we investing further in the kind of systemic reform? I'm not saying it's not useful, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. But I'm arguing that I think we need to be looking at the way in which we think on the discourses that are developing on developing pedagogies of the South or scholarship of the South, and the way in which Brazil, the Brazilian context, the Southern African region context are beginning to challenge whose epistemologies come to define the nature of the higher education system. And I'm wondering, I don't know what the equivalent would be, what a pedagogy of the South Asian would look like, but I'm just putting it out there. Are we paying attention sufficiently to the nature of our epistemology in higher education, or are we really imitative of kinds of education systems that have been designed elsewhere, and we're becoming imitative borrowers in a, as the term isomorphic tendency of really imitation of those systems that might not necessarily be useful for the specifics of a developing world context with the kinds of common challenges that we're seeing across the region. So I'm really just pushing us to start thinking through how that agenda of what is higher education studies could be broadened into a greater landscape.
Thank you very much for that comment, and all kinds of similar thoughts were going through my head as well. I will just say that the couple of terms that I thought would be useful to also explore further, again, just as a lens for us to do something of what you are calling a wider work or a deeper work. One is discourse, because especially when you were talking about that council or something for research, a foundation, I think, my experience with working both at the provincial level in higher education, namely in Banaras, Lucknow, etc., is that all kinds of well-meaning scholars, and of course then their students, actually don't understand what is meant by research, which is a very concept totally rooted somewhere else and has been imported into India and is just used as a word. It's been adapted into all kinds of Indian vocabularies and languages. But none of its actual technical sense is understood. So by, I think as you're sort of suggesting, I'm just translating it into a more practical plane, by starting or bringing into existence some kind of a body that will monitor research or advise on research or fund it and all that, you won't take care of this actual problem, which is growing and by leaps and bounds, since the population is growing and everything is growing, right? That at the level of small towns, cities, and of course villages, the concept itself of research is not understood. And that means the majority of the universities and colleges. You know, so that's just one example. And discourse means the additional exploration of language. How are we, there's so many words and terms in this new educational policy, which I would never be able to materially translate on the ground with people. You know, that language is becoming a fabrication, which people are using as a kind of veil to carry on some other activities behind. We have to discuss language itself, like what do we mean by this, and what, you know, is all the context with which, and I think it can be done. It just needs a different approach also, which can be added. It's not, again, I hope this is a productive comment.
I don't think it's a response so much as a reflection, I think. I think in the scope of the way the handbook has been conceptualized, we have, in fact, we were very keen that we must have sections that bring to the fore the indigenous thinking on defining educational trajectories to communicate and portray ourselves as not just trying to catch up, but also trying to realize an indigenous vision of what education is, what it needs to do. Of course, it's in this complex interplay with our experience of modern education systems, but as Rekha and others have pointed out, it's not simply imitation, but also adaptation. which is what we're going through. So to some extent, I think some of these ideas and thoughts are available in some nascent form and are being discussed in the vision of the handbook. For example, in indigenous education, it is definitely not located in the past, but looking at them as living traditions, not as some things of the past, a purist past that we go back to. And definitely in the context of schooling, the existence of alternate schooling, which have tried to redefine aims of education, purposes of schooling, design of institutions. I think the South Asian region is rich in experiences of this thing called alternative schooling, which we trace back to people like Gandhi and Tagore, and it's a live imagination which continues to inspire even today. So to some extent, I think we have been able to touch or put our finger on some of what you're referring to, Samuel. But I think, maybe, I don't know whether in higher education we have robust enough a discussion or discourse on redefining, but that doesn't mean that the agenda is left out, but I'm wondering how we bring it into the way we are thinking about bringing the scholarship together. I mean, it's there. I mean, I know that in India we have a barefoot college, which is located in Rajasthan, and it represents a very different imagination of what a college could mean in a particular context, in a very contextual way. So, but such live examples in higher education are actually very few for us to be able to draw upon as any systematic effort to rebuild or reimagine higher education. So I'm just more reflecting on the issue which has been raised rather than being able to categorically respond to it. Yeah, so I think it's something to think about, and maybe we should create space for ourselves to reflect on it. But at this point of time, I don't know how we can take it forward.
Yeah, I think these are really interesting issues that are coming up, and I also am not sure how to respond to it. On the one hand, this is a term that Padma uses, that the handbook is performing a landscaping function. So whatever is available, you're consolidating that. Rather, the meeting is titled Future Evolutions, but the handbook is really about what we have as of now and not making recommendations. But this point about the content and the struggle within higher educational institutions, disciplines, I mean, that we are able to speak about these things has come from a lot of social science research. So at least if one could reference those, I'm not sure if it happens in the higher education section or in the knowledge and curriculum, which is largely about school education. But I do think somewhere these issues should be flagged. That I think there was a reference in your talk about South Asian studies being an American. Yes, but then there also been really useful kinds of work coming out from certain scholars, which maybe one can reference again. And yeah, I will have to think about this, and any suggestions for how this can be done would be really useful as well.
At the same time, I think we're not talking about this trend to bring indigenous knowledge into higher education kind of move, which seems to be coming from a very different space, and it's, yeah, so I think we're really talking about a different kind of
Penal basics information for Neeta. The thing about research is, the point is well taken, and that is why I said that, you know, many people don't even understand what research really means, and they use the word very, very loosely. They don't have understanding of methodologies and rooting it in data gathering and analysis and so on. That part is kind of addressed in the specifications of the National Research Foundation, saying that, you know, people with research experience should team up with people who don't have research experience to build capacity. So capacity building and funding capacity building is a very large part of the National Research Foundation. On the issue of languages, the education policy, I mean, there are enough people who understood some of these issues to say that Indian languages also have to be living languages and that its vocabulary should be expanded and all of that. So that bit is also addressed in the education policy, saying that there should be a new institute. I think it's the Institute of some Languages and Interpretation or some such thing. There's a new institute that is proposed for looking into the issue of keeping Indian languages as, you know, growing vocabulary with increasing globalization and, you know, lots of new ideas and concepts coming in that they should all percolate into the Indian languages. So, you know, sort of those, the pieces that can be dealt with have been done. But this is a more sort of interesting issue. I come from the sciences, so, you know, there globalization exerts its own pressures. You don't have a new product or service for your economy unless it is globally acceptable, right? So then science and technology are more global. There's no confusion about that. So that part is easy to do. But when it comes to the social sciences or the humanities, then, I mean, there is room for lots of these discussions, and, you know, I am not qualified to comment on that, really. You have
a very brief observation, or rather a suggestion for the series editor. I think this is a good chance, the handbook itself, to at least start thinking about some of the issues that Samuel is pointing out. You know, whether we can use this as a context to think beyond. See, in school education, we are burdened with policy borrowing, largely from the global north. When it comes to higher education, it is simply aping. You know, we've not been able to get beyond that. And specifically within the higher education sector, there's a whole lot of subaltern literature that is coming out. I don't know if it is possible at all for you to include a section on that as well, since you're just beginning to write up.
Maybe we can have a follow-up conference to this. I mean, we got together because we are authors, contributors to a volume, but it doesn't have to stop here. Maybe we can continue the conversation on South Asia. So if some of you are interested in sort of having a follow-up conference, we could consider doing something 2 years from now, maybe. When the book is out, it's got responses, we know more, and, you know, we've all gone back and studied and looked at our own systems with all these lenses that we've picked up here. Maybe we can do that. But that's something we can also discuss outside. Yeah.
Moshmi is to speak. I had a quick question for Samuel. So your early comments about why have just systems and policies, is it also meant for the school education section or mainly for the higher education?
All right.
Yes.
Professor Leena, I just wanted to know that have you thought of, you know, have you considered incorporating the global rankings of higher education and why South Asian universities are not really doing well in the global rankings? And the other one is, there's a book which has been published by Springer, which is on Latin American universities, which focuses on all, like the universities are focusing on all SDG goals. The Sustainable Development Goals. So have you also thought of considering like whether South Asian universities are also working towards these goals or not?
So your question is still remain unanswered, right? You were just... Okay. So he's going to answer? Okay. So... on your questions then, the SDGs, so one of the criticisms that we got for the policy, and rightly so, is the fact that we didn't discuss the SDGs very much in the education policy. And our thinking at that time was that, look, let's empower the educational institutions, and they will define curriculum, they will become autonomous, they will define curriculum, and they will take SDGs into account. But I think, looking back, that's a mistake. We do need to say that, you know, having committed to the SDGs, we should sort of incorporate those into our curriculum in some very sensible way, and that educational institutions must take those into consideration. At the policy level, that is all you can say. Yeah?
on this higher education system within their country, to view it through the SDG lens as one of the sections of the chapter layout.
So if I look at the higher education in India, I would say at this point that, much of academia is not even aware of this.
Language and the global rankings basically I think determines on the research in English. That's why we can see most of the Chinese universities are doing well because they have all foreign faculties who are writing in English.
So, so I don't know about whether they take language things into account, but I also learned from the IITs that it's also a matter of supplying data. So, if you supply, so they started saying, oh my God, why are we at 300 something? What's going on? Let's look at what the ranking parameters are. They called for the documents and they started supplying information to the ranking agencies, and suddenly the ranks jumped something. India started ranking its own institutions. So we are ranking our universities. So it's called the National Institutional Ranking Framework. So there's NIRF rankings. Predictably, the top 50 institutions are the best institutions that this country has to offer. But below that, does the ranking mean anything? I don't know the answer to that. So is it a barometer of quality? Correct.
Not being as much as...
Correct. So the rankings have limited value, but I do think that rankings do wake up people. And they say, oh, how come we are so low or this or that? So some competitive spirit is grown, but I don't think one should read too much into rankings.
No, thank you, Rekha. I'm responding to Padma's question. The name is Michael. I know I've got two first names. Michael's my first name. So I'm responding to the faith in policy, and perhaps it comes from my other schizophrenic head that I have, which is South Africa, and the fact that since 1994, in the post-independence era, post-democratic, in the democratic era, the school curriculum has been through 5 changes of curriculum because of the constant lack of faith in the possibility that curriculum reform can be directed, and rather that curriculum reform, it needs much more agentic power at various stakeholders and various levels of the system. And I think I personally was involved in teacher education construction of policy nationally, and the shift is to decentralize that kind of decision making, to be able to talk about communities of practice, to talk about activating agency, to be activating and mobilizing networking as alternatives to the policy agenda. And I think a lot of governments have invested a lot of faith in policy as dictating the systems. And I'm linking back to our first presentation this morning to argue that it has possibilities, but in my opinion, serious limitations as the possibility to lever deep change. You might get, as comment just now, surface change for a group of elite universities or elite institutions who play by that rule and get the currency that they wish for offering good quality education. But for the vast majority, they get left behind. And so what then is policy actually achieving? The symbolic rhetoric that we're moving to globalize quality education, etc., but the vast majority remain stuck where they are. And I think that's my concern, and that's why I'm raising it as part of a democratic question about, is our policy bifurcating the system, one for the privileged and one for the poor?
My question is, this point has come up several times today. A Bangladeshi friend asked me why was the IIM that he went to so much better run, and we have again and again come to this question in many ways, rankings, and so the question is, one aspect of course is autonomy. Several university administrators have told me, especially public public university administrators, that they have really no power even to collaborate with a simple institution abroad, which private ones now have because of the autonomy. And the second thing is, the second question that arises is resourcing, And the third question that arises is, a combination of these two and size. For example, Delhi University used to be a premier university at one point. Maybe one of the premier universities in Asia, actually. It used to be, maybe 50 years ago or 60 years ago, it used to be the premier university in Asia. And the size of it, the taking away autonomy from the administration, the resource starvation of the university combined with the policies, the various policies, to create a place where professors have become just position holders, and they are also trying to game the system. The bureaucrats are trying to game the system. So what is more important? Or is it a combination of all three? Or what should be the sequencing? Should we first make them autonomous and then give them funding? Or should we first give them funding and then make them autonomous? Should we reduce their size should we change teacher? I mean, the problem is we don't have enough research actually to say that what should be the combination and sequencing of policy in order to create a good institution. And I'm against all this ranking thing because the problem is this ranking business, as rightly pointed out, depends on whether you provide information. For example, TIS, or a social science university like mine, we cannot be ranked because we don't produce scientific hard science. And what they see in ranking is they see the combination of all the research that you're doing. So if you're just a social science, you will not get a high ranking. Though if you're just a technical science, natural sciences university, you can get because the number of papers that are generated are much faster. A single professor can generate many more papers in a short period of time. I mean, those things are there. So ranking is not important, but obviously reputation is still important. The reputation that Delhi University had in Asia at least doesn't exist. So which depends on all of these factors somewhere, autonomy, funding, size and policies, teacher policy. So what is important in this? We don't have actually an answer. At least I don't know. No? Maybe you.
If it's very important.
In case of Bangladesh, I should say, and it may be applicable in case of Indian public universities. They are totally autonomous. But with the autonomy, we need to add another thing, accountability. Accountability is very important. Merely autonomy is not enough. As liberty becomes license in South Asian context, I think it is truer than anything. So I think accountability should also be added. Thank you.
So thank you very much.